2:10 in the morning, the Persian Gulf, the lead F-18E Super Hornet of Strike, Fighter Squadron 143, was already banking into its final attack run. This was not a show of force. This was a mission cleared for live fire. For the first time in 30 years, the entire air wing was cleared hot. Why the rules of engagement had shifted so suddenly was a question for the politicians. For the pilots, there was only the mission. Commander Elias Thorne felt the weight of the aircraft as he pulled 4 Gs. The cockpit was a small island of green light in a vast ocean of black. Below him, the dark waters of the Strait of Hormuz hid 100 different threats. His eyes were fixed on the glass display in front of him. His mission was specific. Strike Fighter Squadron 143, known as the Pukin Dogs, was the tip of a very sharp spear. Behind him, 21 other aircraft were moving into their assigned sectors. There were more Super Hornets. There were EA-18G Growlers for electronic warfare. There were E-2D Advanced Hawkeyes circling high above to coordinate the engagement. The orders had come directly from the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Intelligence suggested a mobile ballistic missile battery was preparing for launch. The window to stop it was closing. This was a preemptive strike. It was the kind of mission that started wars. Thorne checked his fuel state. He had plenty. He checked his master arm switch. It was still in the safe position, but his thumb hovered near the toggle. In 90 seconds, he would flip it. 2:12 in the morning. High above the carrier strike group, the air was thick with the scent of ozone and jet fuel. The USS Abraham Lincoln was a hive of controlled chaos. On the flight deck, the final 2 jets were screaming down the catapults. The sound was a physical blow to the chest of every sailor on deck. Thorne adjusted his oxygen mask. His breathing was steady. He had flown hundreds of combat hours over Iraq and Syria. This felt different. The air felt heavy. The electronic signatures on his display were blinking with a strange frequency. The controller spoke from the Hawkeye, circling at 30,000 feet. Lion 161. This is Guardian. You are approaching the release point. Confirm you have the target. In sight on infrared. Thorne looked at his right-hand display. A grainy white shape appeared. It was the missile battery. It was parked in a valley near the coast. Thorne responded into his radio. Guardian. This is Lion 161. I have a positive lock on the target. Weapons are hot in 60 seconds. The response was immediate. Copy, Lion. You are cleared for engagement. Upon reaching the mark, the theater is yours. Thorne felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. He was the lead. If he fired, the world would change before the sun came up. He looked out at the horizon. The Iranian coastline was a jagged shadow against the stars. 2:14 in the morning. Inside the cockpit, the tactical data link showed the positions of every aircraft in the wing. They were a perfect formation of death. The coordination was flawless. The American military machine was performing exactly as it was designed to do. Thorne reached for the master arm switch. His heart rate stayed at 60 beats per minute. He was a professional. He was a tool of national policy. He glanced at his wingman. The other Super Hornet was a ghost. In the dark. It was identifiable only by the faint glow of its formation lights. They were seconds away from the point of no return. The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 2:16 in the morning. The Combat Information Center of the United States ship Abraham Lincoln. Deep within the hull of the carrier, far below the waterline, the Combat Information Center was a room of shadows and glowing blue glass. The air was kept at a constant 68 degrees to protect the processors that served as the brain of the fleet. There was no sound here except the low hum of cooling fans and the rhythmic tapping of keyboards. Admiral Marcus Vance stood behind a row of technical workstations. He was watching the tactical display. To a casual observer, it was a mess of symbols and lines. To Vance, it was a map of a world about to ignite. The primary display showed the entire Persian Gulf. The 22 aircraft of the strike wing were small yellow icons moving steadily. toward the Iranian coast. For the last 10 minutes, the Iranian air defense network had been quiet. That was about to change. The radar officer spoke without turning his head. "Admiral, we have a pop-up contact. Site 6 near Bandar Abbas just went active. They are radiating with a Big Bird acquisition radar." Vance did not move. "Confirm the signature." The officer tapped a sequence of keys. Signature confirmed. It is an S-300 surface-to-air missile system. They are looking for our lead elements. "Sir, we have another. Site 4 is active. They are in a high PRF track mode. They are looking for a target to lock." Vance checked time. 2:17 in the morning. The Iranians were not blind. They had detected the incoming strike. The professional tension in the spotter's room ratcheted up a notch. This was the moment of tactical truth. If the Iranians locked on, the American pilots would have to defend themselves. Once a missile was in the air, there would be no way to stop the escalation. Guardian to Lion flight. The controller in the Hawkeye called out over the encrypted channel. "You are being painted. Multiple sites are active. Electronic warfare teams are authorized to jam. Repeat, you are clear to jam." 2:18 in the morning. On the carrier, the Admiral watched as the yellow icons on the screen began to change. Small, jagged lines appeared next to the aircraft symbols. The Growlers were pumping out gigawatts of electronic noise. They were trying to drown the Iranian radars in a sea of static. It was a digital duel. If the Iranians could see through the noise, the Super Hornets were in danger. "Admiral, the tactical director," said. His voice was low and steady. "The National Security Agency reports a massive spike in Iranian communications. They are scrambled. They are calling for their interceptors to launch from the mainland." Vance looked at the display. He saw a new set of icons appearing near the coast. Red triangles. These were the Iranian 4 Phantoms and 14 Tomcats. They were old aircraft, but they were well maintained. And they were fast. They were climbing to meet the American wing. "How long until they are in range of our lead?" Vance asked. 3 minutes, sir," the director replied. "The Iranians are committed. They are not turning back." Vance reached for the secure telephone that connected him to the Pentagon. He had the authority to proceed, but the situation had shifted from a surgical strike to a full-scale aerial engagement. The decision to continue was no longer just about a missile battery. It was about the lives of his pilots and the stability of the entire region. 2:19 in the morning. "Tell the wing to maintain their course," Vance ordered. "We are not aborting. If the interceptors cross the line, our pilots are cleared to engage. Remind them, no one fires until the Iranians show hostile intent or a weapons lock." The order was flashed to the aircraft in seconds. In the Combat Information Center, every eye was on the red triangles closing the gap. The distance was 40 nautical miles. Then 35. The electronic signatures from the Iranian radars were getting stronger. They were burning through the American jamming. 2:20 in the morning. A new alarm sounded at the radar station. It was a high-pitched, urgent chirp. The officer's voice was sharp. "Admiral, we have a launch. One missile in the air from Site 4. It is tracking Lion 161. The room went silent. The first shot had been fired. 2:21 in the morning. The Ground Control Intercept Center at Bandar Abbas. Deep inside a reinforced concrete bunker carved into the coastal hills, Major Abbas Rezai stared at a flickering green monitor. The air in the room was thick with the smell of old coffee and the hum of powerful cooling units. This was the nerve center for the southern air defense sector of Iran. For 20 years, Rezai had watched the Americans. He had seen their carriers come and go. He had tracked their patrols. Usually, it was a game of cat and mouse. Today, the cat was not playing. On his screen, a cluster of 22 targets moved with purposeful speed. They were not loitering. They were not flying a standard pattern. They were headed directly for the coastline at 500 knots. Rezai spoke into his headset. His voice was calm. It was the calm of a man who had practiced this moment 1,000 times. Center to Battery 4. Confirm your track on the lead target. The jamming is heavy. Can you maintain a lock? The response from the S-300 missile battery was distorted by electronic noise. Major, this is Battery 4. The American jamming is intense. We are losing the primary signal. Switching to home on jam mode. 2:22 in the morning. Rezaiah looked at the secondary display. To his left, two F-14 Tomcats were screaming down the runway at the nearby airbase. Their afterburners were long tongues of blue flame against the desert night. These pilots were his friends. They were flying aircraft that were 40 years old against the most advanced fighters in the world. Rezaiah knew the math. In a fair fight, his pilots would not come home. But this was not about a fair fight. It was about sovereignty. Ali 1 and Ali 2. You are airborne, Rezaiah said, directing the interceptors. Vector 270. Climb 2. 20,000 feet. The Americans are 40 miles out. You are cleared to arm your missiles. Do not fire unless the battery confirms a hostile launch or you are fired upon. Inside the cockpit of the lead Iranian F-14, the pilot reached for a toggle switch. He was sweating despite the cold air at altitude. He could see the American jamming strobes on his own radar. It looked like a wall of white light. He knew the Americans were out there. Somewhere in that white light, 22 killers were waiting for him. 2:23 in the morning. Back in the bunker, Rezaiah saw a new symbol appear on his screen. It was a bright red diamond. The S-300 battery had successfully achieved a hard lock on the lead American jet. The system was automated. In automatic response mode, the computer would fire if it calculated a high probability of a strike against the coast. Major, the system is engaging. The battery commander shouted over the radio. Target is inside the kill zone. Missile away. Rezaiah watched the screen as a small white dot separated from the battery icon. It was moving at Mach 4. It was an S-300 missile. It was a weapon, designed to destroy. He felt a heavy weight in his chest. He was a professional soldier. He had done his duty. But he also knew that once that missile left the rail, there was no taking it back. The world was about to get very small. Ali flight. Brake left, Rezaiah commanded. The battery has fired. Stay clear of the engagement zone. The Americans will respond. Prepare for defensive maneuvers. The room in the bunker went silent. Every man there knew what was coming next. The Americans would not just fly away. They would strike back with everything they had. Rezaiah gripped the edge of his console. His knuckles were white. He looked at the clock. 2:24 in the morning. The missile was 30 seconds from impact. On the other side of the Gulf, 100 miles away, more American jets were already taking off. The escalation had begun. Rezaiah closed his eyes for a second. He hoped the Americans would miss. He hoped his pilots would survive. But most of all, he hoped the world would still be there in the morning. 2:24 in the morning. The cockpit of Lion 161. The world inside Commander Thorne's helmet exploded in sound. It was the high-pitched, rhythmic warble of the radar warning receiver. It was a sound every pilot hoped never to hear outside of a flight simulator. A solid line of light appeared on his vertical display. It pointed directly toward the Iranian coast. Thorne did not hesitate. Lion 161. Missile launch. I am defensive. Southwest. Pumping. He slammed the throttle forward. The twin engines of the Super Hornet roared. As the afterburners ignited, the force shoved him deep into his seat. He banked the aircraft into a sharp, descending turn toward the water. He was trying to put the missile on his beam. He needed to make it work to track him. To his left and right, the sky was filled with bright white streaks. These were the magnesium flares and bundles of radar-reflecting chaff. He was creating a cloud of decoys. He was trying to blind the incoming S-300. 2:25 in the morning. Guardian. This is Lion 161. Thorne gasped. The G-force made it hard to speak. Missile is still tracking. I am inside the basket. I need electronic warfare support now. High above, the EA-18G Growlers responded. Their pilots were working with frantic precision. They focused their high-powered jamming pods into a narrow beam. They were trying to break the link between the Iranian radar on the ground and the missile in the air. Inside the cockpits of the other 21 American jets, the mood had shifted from tension to cold aggression. The rules of engagement were clear. If one was fired upon, the entire wing was authorized to respond. All Lion flights. This is Lion-led. The second-in-command called out. Fence in. Master arm is hot. Select air-to-ground ordnance. Prepare for suppression of enemy air defenses. Across the wing, 22 thumbs moved in unison. They flipped the red, guarded switches. The digital displays changed from green to a lethal amber. The pilots were no longer just observers. They were predators. They selected their missiles. High-speed anti-radiation missiles, known as HARMs, were brought online. These weapons were designed to fly down the beam of an enemy radar and destroy it at the source. 2:26 in the morning, Thorne watched the missile on his display. It was a small, white diamond closing the gap. It was moving at 3,000 miles per hour. He could see the faint glow of its rocket motor in the distance. It looked like a falling star. Only this star was coming for him. 10 seconds to impact, the computer voice stated in his ear. The voice was calm and female. It was a haunting contrast to the chaos outside the glass. Thorne pulled the stick back hard. He climbed vertically. He was trading speed for altitude. He was trying to lure the missile into thin air where its control surfaces would be less effective. His breath was a ragged hiss in his mask. His vision began to tunnel as the blood left his head. He was at the edge of his physical limit. 5 seconds, the computer said. Lion 161. Brake now, the Growler pilot screamed over the radio. Thorne kicked the rudder and slammed the stick to the side. The jet rolled violently. Below him, the Iranian missile missed his wing by less than 50 meters. The shock wave rattled his airframe like a tin can. Missed, Thorne exhaled. The missile is in the water. I am safe. I am coming back around. His voice was hard. The fear was gone. It had been replaced by a cold, professional anger. He leveled the wings and looked at his targeting screen. The Iranian radar site was still radiating. It was still a threat. All Lion flights, Thorne commanded. His voice was steady again. The target has engaged us. We are taking that site down. On my mark, all aircraft, prepare for weapons release. The 22 American jets began to level off. They were a wall of steel moving toward the coast. The Iranians had fired first. Now, the Americans were going to finish it. 2:27 in the morning. The sky over the Strait of Hormuz. Commander Thorne leveled his Super Hornet at 18,000 feet. His breath was a steady, rhythmic hiss in the oxygen mask. Around him, the 21 other aircraft of the wing shifted into a wide combat spread. On his tactical display, the world was a grid of lethal geometry. The Iranian coast was no longer a shadow. It was a collection of radar emitters and heat signatures. Every pilot in the wing had their thumb hovering over the weapons release button. The master arm switches were up. The safety covers were open. All Lion units. This is lead, Thorne said. His voice was flat. Cold. We are committed. Target priority is the S-300 battery at Site 4. Electronic warfare teams, prepare to blanket the secondary sites. We are going in. The response was a series of short, professional clicks on the radio. No one wasted words. The training took over. This was the muscle memory of 1,000 hours in the simulator. The pilots checked their fuel, their altitude, and their target locks. The air-to-ground missiles were talking to the aircraft computers. The seekers were looking for the specific frequency of the Iranian radars. 2:28 in the morning. Inside the Iranian bunker at Bandar Abbas, Major Rezai watched the American icons turn. They were no longer flying away. They were pivoting back toward the coast with predatory speed. The distance was closing at a combined rate of over 1,000 miles per hour. Major, the Americans are coming about the radar operator shouted. "They are in attack formation. Multiple locks detected. They are targeting our emitters." Rezai did not blink. He picked up the radio to his interceptors. "Ali 1. Ali 2. The Americans have turned. You are cleared to engage. Any target crossing the 12-mile limit. Use your long-range missiles. Do not let them reach the coast." 30 miles away, the two Iranian F-14 Tomcats pushed their throttles into full afterburner. The massive engines dumped raw fuel into the exhaust, creating 20-foot tongues of fire in the night sky. The pilots felt the kick in their backs as the heavy fighters accelerated, past Mach 1.2. They were old jets, but their radar was powerful. They began to sweep the sky, looking for the American lead. 2:28 in the morning and 30 seconds. The situation was now a massive, high-speed collision course. On the American side, 22 aircraft were ready to fire. On the Iranian side, 2 interceptors and 6 surface-to-air missile batteries were fully active. The electronic environment was a screaming mess of jamming and counter-jamming. In the middle of it all, the human beings were the only things keeping the machines from firing on their own. "I have a radar lock," the pilot of Ali 1 called out. "American lead is at 40 miles. Selecting Phoenix missile. I am ready." "Steady." Ali 1, Rezai ordered from the bunker. "Wait for the mark. Let them cross the line." On the American carrier, Admiral Vance watched. The red and yellow icons moved toward each other. The gap was 20 nautical miles. At their current speed, they would be on top of each other in less than 60 seconds. The air wing was seconds away from a massive coordinated launch. If Thorne gave the order, more than 40 missiles would be in the air at once. It would be an atmospheric firestorm. 2:29 in the morning. Thorne saw the Iranian interceptors on his screen. They were coming fast. He saw the S-300 battery go active again. It was looking for a second shot. He felt the sweat slicking his palms inside his flight gloves. He tightened his grip on the control stick. "Guardian, this is Lion Lead," Thorne said. "We are at the release point. 10 seconds to Magnum. 10 seconds to weapons away." The morning was about to disappear in a flash of white light. The line was reached. The decision was made. 2:29 in the morning. The Persian Gulf. Commander Thorne felt the mechanical click of the weapons release button through his flight glove. It was a small, tactile movement that carried the weight of history. He spoke the word into his mask. Magnum. Under his right wing, a high-speed anti-radiation missile dropped into the dark. Its solid-state rocket motor ignited a fraction of a second later. A brilliant plume of white fire lit up the side of his cockpit. The missile accelerated instantly, reaching twice the speed of sound, as it climbed toward the Iranian radar signature. Behind him, the rest of the wing followed his lead. Magnum, Magnum, Magnum. The radio channel was a steady, rhythmic chorus of the same word. To the observers on the carrier, it sounded like a litany. 22 American jets had just released their primary ordnance. The sky was suddenly filled with streaks of artificial light. These were not just missiles. They were the opening notes of a symphony of destruction. Each weapon was programmed to find a specific electronic frequency. They were digital hunters, seeking the eyes of the Iranian defense network. 2:29 and 20 seconds. Inside the Iranian F-14, the pilot saw the American launch on his tactical display. He did not hesitate. He had been trained for this moment since he was a cadet. He pulled the trigger on his control column. "Fox 3, he shouted. A massive Phoenix missile fell away from the belly of the heavy interceptor. It was a weapon designed for the Cold War. It was built to kill at long ranges. The missile ignited and surged forward, its internal radar active and searching for the lead American Super Hornet. His wingman fired seconds later. 2 giant missiles were now screaming across the water toward Thorne's flight. On the ground near Bandar Abbas, the S-300 battery commander watched the American missiles closing on his position. He was a professional. He knew the math. He knew he had less than 40 seconds before the American harms reached his position. He pushed the fire button for his entire battery. 4 more surface-to-air missiles erupted from their canisters. They rose on pillars of fire, turning the desert night into day. 2:29 and 40 seconds. The space between the two forces was now a corridor of high-speed metal. The American Growlers were operating at maximum capacity. Their jamming pods were screaming. They were pumping out gigawatts of electronic noise to confuse the incoming Iranian missiles. The air was thick with invisible energy. In the Combat Information Center of the Abraham Lincoln, Admiral Vance stood perfectly still. He did not breathe. He watched the main display. It was no longer a tactical map. It was a chaotic swarm of icons. Red and yellow lines were intersecting in a terrifying dance. The computers were struggling to track every separate projectile. "Impact in 10 seconds, the tactical director said. His voice was a dry whisper. 2:29 and 50 seconds. Thorne saw the Iranian FINIS missile on his radar. It was a white diamond of death, closing the gap at Mach 4. He prepared to bank. He prepared to execute the most violent maneuver of his life. He felt the vibration of his engines through his seat. He felt the cold air in his lungs. Every pilot on both sides had their eyes fixed on their glass displays. Every sensor was wide open. Every computer in the sky and on the ground was at maximum processing speed. The missiles were miles apart. Then, hundreds of meters. The tension in the air was a physical force. It was the end of the world. It was the moment the fire would consume everything. 2:30 in the morning. The Persian Gulf. The world did not end in a flash of heat. It ended in a flicker of glass. Inside the cockpit of Lion 161, Commander Thorne was bracing for the impact of the FINIS missile. His eyes were locked on the closing distance. 500 meters. 400. Then, every screen in his cockpit went pitch black. The green glow of the heads-up display vanished. The amber warnings of the tactical map disappeared. For a heartbeat, Thorne thought he was dead. He thought the missile had already hit, and his brain was simply processing the final milliseconds of existence. But he could still feel the vibration of the engines. He could still hear the hiss of his own breathing. He was alive, but his aircraft was blind. Thorne looked down at his primary flight display. It was no longer black. A single word was written across the glass in a stark, white font. It was not English. It was not Farsi. It was a sequence of symbols that looked like ancient cuneiform. As he watched, the symbols shifted. They rearranged themselves with a liquid smoothness that no military software could emulate. The symbols became a word he recognized, yet it was written in a language that had been dead for 2,000 years. The word was FINIS. 2:30 in the morning and 15 seconds. Inside the Iranian bunker at Bandar Abbas, Major Rezai screamed for a status update. His entire wall of monitors had frozen. The radar tracks, the missile telemetry, and the communications links had all been replaced by the same image. A single word on a white background. The same word Thorne was seeing. "System override," the technician shouted, his hands flying across a keyboard that no longer responded. "Major, every terminal is locked. We have no control over the surface-to-air batteries. We have lost contact with the interceptors. It is not the Americans. This is something else." Rezai looked at the word on the screen. He did not know Latin, but he knew the look of a terminal command. This was not a glitch. This was an intervention. It was as if a giant hand had reached down and pulled the plug on the entire war. 2:30 in the morning and 30 seconds. High above the water, the missiles were gone. The 40 American HARMs, the 4 Iranian S-300 interceptors, and the 2 FINIS missiles had not exploded. They had simply ceased to function. Their rocket motors had cut out simultaneously. Their internal guidance computers had wiped themselves clean. Thousands of pounds of high explosives and advanced electronics were falling harmlessly into the dark waters of the Gulf like dead birds. Thorne gripped his control stick. It was stiff. The fly-by-wire system was no longer responding to his inputs. The aircraft was flying itself, held in a perfect, level attitude by a force he could not identify. He looked out his canopy. To his left, his wingman was in the same position. The other Super Hornet was glowing with a faint, static blue light. Lion flight. Does anyone have comms? Thorne said. There was no static. There was no side tone. The radio was dead. He looked back at the screen. The word FINIS began to pulse. It was a slow, steady rhythm, like a heartbeat. Every time it pulsed, the blue light outside the cockpit grew brighter. Thorne realized with a jolt of pure, primal fear that he was no longer in control of his multi-million-dollar fighter. None of them were. The 22 American jets and the 2 Iranian interceptors were being moved like chess pieces on a board. The two forces, which had been seconds away from a lethal collision, were now being pushed apart. The American wing was being forced west, back toward the carrier. The Iranian jets were being forced east, toward the mainland. 2:31 in the morning. The blue light faded as quickly as it had appeared. The cockpit displays flickered once, twice, and then returned to their normal tactical modes. The maps were back. The radars were active, but the sky was empty. There were no missiles. There were no targets. Thorne checked his master arm switch. It was in the safe position. He had not touched it. The computer had reset the weapon systems for him. The silence on the radio was broken by a voice from the carrier. It was Admiral Vance. He didn't sound like an admiral. He sounded like a man who had seen a ghost. All Lion units. This is Lincoln. Disengage immediately. Return to Mother. Do not, repeat, do not track any targets. The mission is scrubbed. Get out of there. Now. Thorne did not argue. He pulled his jet into a wide, slow turn away from Iran. He looked at his screen one last time. The word was gone, but the feeling of being watched remained. 2:31 in the morning, high over the Persian Gulf. Commander Thorne felt the stick come alive in his hand. The stiffness was gone. The fly-by-wire system was no longer fighting him. He banked his Super Hornet 10 degrees to the left, testing the response. The jet moved with its usual, crisp precision. On his right, the glass displays were back to their standard tactical layout. The amber warnings had turned back to a calm, steady green, but the radar screen was a void. Guardian. This is Lion 161, Thorne said. His voice was raspy. Confirm tactical picture. My screen is clean. I repeat, the sky is empty. Where are the vampires? Where are the missiles? The controller in the Hawkeye sounded breathless. Lion. This is Guardian. We are trying to verify. According to our telemetry, all active tracks terminated at 2:30 and 10 seconds. We did not detect any explosions, no thermal blooms, no debris clouds. The missiles they stopped moving. They fell into the water. 46 contacts lost simultaneously. Thorne looked at his fuel gauge. He had used a significant amount in his defensive maneuvers, but he was still within safety margins. He looked at his wingman. The other pilot was giving him a thumbs up, but through the canopy, Thorne could see the man's head shaking. They were professionals, trained for every contingency from engine failure to nuclear war. They were not trained for a miracle. 2:33 in the morning. Inside the Iranian F-14 Tomcat, the pilot, Ali, leveled, his wings at 15,000 feet. He was breathing heavily into his mask. His hands were resting on his knees. He was not touching the controls. He was watching his own radar screen. The American strike wing was moving away. They were flying at a steady 300 knots, headed back toward their carrier. They were not in a combat formation. They were in a transit file. Center. This is Ali 1, he said, into his radio. The Americans are withdrawing. My weapon systems have reset. Ta standby. I did not initiate the reset. Confirm orders. Should I pursue? In the bunker at Bandar Abbas, Major Rizai stood, frozen. He was looking at the main display wall. The symbols were back, but they were different. Every Iranian missile battery on the coast had been switched from active to maintenance mode. It was a state that usually required a physical key and a manual override at the terminal. Override at the terminal. Ali 1. This is Center, Rizai replied. He sounded older than he had 5 minutes ago. Do not pursue. I repeat, Do not pursue. Maintain a distance of 30 miles. We are receiving a direct order from Tehran. All units are to stand down. Do not radiate. Do not lock. The engagement is over. 2:34 in the morning. On the bridge of the USS Abraham Lincoln, Admiral Vance was reading a printed transcript from the main tactical computer. The machine had recorded the interference. It had captured the symbols. But when the technicians tried to run a diagnostic, the logs from those 60 seconds were missing. It was as if the ship's memory had been selectively erased. "Admiral," the tactical director said, "the Pentagon is on the secure line. They want a full brief on the electronic attack. They are calling it a unilateral technical failure." Vance crumpled the paper in his hand. "A failure? We had 22 jets and 6 missile batteries neutralized by a single word in a dead language. That isn't a failure. That's a demonstration." He looked out the windows of the bridge. The horizon was still dark, but the tension that had gripped the fleet for the last hour was beginning to dissolve into a profound, chilling confusion. The war had been canceled, not by a treaty and not by a surrender. It had been turned off. 2:35 in the morning. Thorne led the wing across the invisible line that marked the center of the Gulf. He looked back one last time toward the Iranian coast. There were no lights, no flashes of fire. The world was as it should be. Quiet, dark, cold. He clicked his radio. "All Lion units, keep your eyes open. We are going home." 2:40 in the morning. The Western Gulf. The lights of the USS Abraham Lincoln appeared on the horizon, like a floating city of amber and white. For Commander Thorne, the sight was usually a relief. Tonight, it felt like a question mark. He led the 22 aircraft of the wing into the landing pattern. The precision required for a night carrier landing usually demanded his absolute focus, but his mind was elsewhere. He kept looking at the glass display where the word had been. The screen was perfect. The glass was cool to the touch, but the data was gone. Lincoln. "This is Lion 161, Thorne said, requesting priority recovery. My wing is clean. All ordnance expended or lost. Copy, Lion." "You are cleared for the trap," the carrier air traffic controller replied. The man's voice was shaky. "Be advised. We are experiencing intermittent signal loss on our primary approach radar. We are switching to manual guidance. Watch your glide slope." Thorne felt the landing gear thump into place. He checked his instruments. They were functioning. But there was a strange lag. It was as if the aircraft was thinking before it obeyed. He narrowed his eyes. He caught the wire on the first attempt. The tailhook grabbed the steel cable and yanked the jet to a violent, screaming halt. The deceleration felt like a physical weight being lifted off his chest. He was back, but he was not safe. 2:45 in the morning. The airfield at Bandar Abbas. The 2 Iranian F-14 Tomcats touched down on the desert runway. Their tires smoked as they hit the asphalt. Usually, a successful intercept would be met with cheers from the ground crew. Tonight, there was only a haunting silence. The technicians stood by their hangars with their hands at their sides. They were looking at their handheld diagnostic tablets. Major Rezai met the pilots on the flight line. He did not wait for them to climb down from the cockpits. He stood on the ladder as the lead pilot, Ali, pulled his helmet off. The pilot's face was pale. His hair was soaked with sweat. "The black boxes," Rezai said. His voice was a whisper. "Ali, what did you see on the screen?" "It was a word, Major," Ali said. He looked at his hands. They were shaking. It was not a virus. It was not a jammer. The aircraft. It spoke to me. It told me the fight was over. And then it took the controls. I could not even eject. The system locked me in. Rezai looked back at the control tower. The lights were flickering in a pattern that made no sense. It was not a power surge. It was a rhythm. He realized then that the mystery was not limited to the sky. Whatever had intervened had touched every wire and every circuit in the province. 2:50 in the morning. The intelligence center of the Abraham Lincoln. Admiral Vance stood in front of a bank of servers. His lead technical officer was sweating. The man had a screwdriver in one hand and a data probe in the other. He looked up at the admiral with a look of pure academic terror. "Sir, I have pulled the primary drive from the lead growler," the officer said. "The electronic warfare logs should be full of the Iranian radar signatures. They should show the jamming patterns. They should show the missile telemetry." "And?" Vance asked. "There is nothing, Admiral," the officer said. "It is not that the data was deleted. It was replaced. The entire drive is filled with a single file. It is a high-definition image of the constellations as they appeared over the Gulf 2,000 years ago. And the file size is impossible. It is 400 terabytes. We do not even have a drive that large, but it is there, on a 20-terabyte disk." Vance leaned against the bulkhead. He felt a cold shiver run down his spine. This was not a weapon from China or Russia. This was not a secret American project. This was a violation of the laws of physics. "The missiles," Vance said. "Did we find the wreckage?" "The search and rescue helos are over the impact site now," the officer replied. "They found the fuel slicks, but they did not find any metal, no guidance fins, no warheads. It is as if the missiles were dismantled into their component atoms before they hit the water." The room went quiet. Outside, the wind howled across the flight deck. The mystery was deepening. The more they looked at the evidence, the less they understood. They had been prepared for a war of missiles and radar. They had found themselves in a war against something that viewed their technology as a toy. 3:15 in the morning. The USS Abraham Lincoln. The bridge was a cavern of low light and quiet murmurs. The high-pitched whine of the combat alarms had finally stopped. It was replaced by the steady, rhythmic clicking of mechanical keyboards. Admiral Vance looked at the primary status board. The FINIS message had vanished exactly 45 minutes after it appeared. Every system on the ship was reporting as normal. The radars were scanning. The radios were clear. The weapons were armed and ready. But the tension remained. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket over the crew. The tactical director approached Vance. "Admiral, the last of the Lion flight is in the hangar. Maintenance reports no physical damage to any airframe. But the software is different. The code has been rewritten. It is still functional, but it is encrypted with a cipher we cannot recognize." Vance nodded slowly. "The Iranians, what are they doing?" "They have pulled back, sir," the director replied. "Their interceptors are on the ground. Their coastal radars are in standby mode. We are receiving a message through the Swiss embassy. They are requesting a temporary ceasefire. They are calling it a technical cooling-off period." Vance turned to the window. "They are just as terrified as we are." 3:15 in the morning. The Bandar Abbas Air Base. Major Rezai stood on the tarmac. He watched the fuel trucks moving toward the F-14 Tomcats. The pilots were already in the debriefing room. They were being questioned by men in dark suits, who had arrived by helicopter from the capital. The atmosphere was not one of military defiance. It was one of scientific emergency. Rezai looked up at the stars. The sky was indifferent. It was the same sky that had looked down on the Gulf for thousands of years. He thought about the word on the screen. He thought about the missiles that had turned into dust. A junior officer ran up to him. "Major, the satellite link is back. We are receiving data from the northern sector. It happened there, too. Every radar from the Turkish border to the Sea of Oman. Everything stopped at the same second." Rezai did not answer. He knew what it meant. This was not a local event. It was a global message. Back on the carrier, Commander Thorne sat in the pilot's lounge. He held a cup of coffee in both hands. His flight suit was still damp with sweat. He looked at the wall clock. The seconds were ticking by with agonizing slowness. His wingman sat down next to him. "We almost did it, Elias. We almost started it." Thorne looked at his friend. "We did not stop it. Something else did. We were just passengers." The crisis was over. The weapons were cold. No one celebrated. The professionalism of both sides had been superseded by an authority they did not understand. The peace felt like a warning. 8:15 in the morning. 6 hours after the world almost ended, the USS Abraham Lincoln was no longer at flight quarters. The frenetic energy of the previous night had been replaced by a heavy, analytical silence. On the flight deck, the Super Hornets sat in neat rows, their engines cool, their cockpits covered. To a casual observer, it looked like a standard morning at sea. But inside the secure briefing room, known as the Blue Room, the atmosphere was electric, with a different kind of tension. Admiral Vance sat at the head of a mahogany table. Commander Thorne sat to his left. Across from them were 3 men in civilian suits who had arrived by a high-speed transport plane only an hour before. They were from the National Security Agency and the Office of Naval Intelligence. They did not introduce themselves. They simply opened their laptops and began to project data onto the wall. 6 hours ago, we experienced what we are calling a total system intervention, the lead analyst said. His voice was clinical. It was not a hack. It was not a virus. It was a synchronized, multi-domain override of every military asset in the Persian Gulf. And as of 20 minutes ago, we have confirmed it was not limited to this theater. Vance leaned forward. Explain. The analyst clicked a key. A map of the world appeared. Small white circles began to pulse in various locations. At exactly 2:30 in the morning, local time, the same event occurred in the Donbass region of Ukraine. It occurred in the Taiwan Strait. It occurred on the border between India and Pakistan. In every instance, hostile units were seconds away from engagement. In every instance, the weapons failed. The sensors went dark, and the word FINIS appeared on every display. 8:45 in the morning. Thorne looked at the map. The scope was staggering. This was not a weapon owned by a nation-state. This was a global curtain call. The missiles, Thorne asked. What did you find in the water? The analyst paused. He looked at his colleagues before answering. We sent a deep-sea recovery drone to the coordinates where your telemetry lost the Iranian S-300 missiles. We expected to find wreckage. We found something else. We found a high concentration of refined silicon and carbon fibers. The materials were in a state of molecular separation. It is as if the missiles were not just destroyed. They were unmade. The chemical bonds that held the metal together were simply switched off. The room went silent. The implications were terrifying. If someone, or something, could turn a missile into dust with a remote command, the entire concept of military power was obsolete. The billions of dollars spent on stealth, speed, and lethality meant nothing. 2:15 in the afternoon, 18 hours after the encounter. In Tehran, a similar meeting was taking place. Major Rezai stood before a committee of high-ranking generals. He showed them the same data. He told them the same story. The Iranian scientists were baffled. Their best electronic warfare experts had spent the last 12 hours trying to find a trace of a signal or a frequency that could account for the override. They found nothing. The airwaves had been as clear as a summer day. The message from the Iranian leadership was uncharacteristically quiet. There were no threats of retaliation. There were no claims of victory. There was only a request for a direct line of communication with the Americans. For the first time in decades, both nations were staring at a threat that made their mutual animosity seem small. Vance stood up and walked to the window of the briefing room. He looked out at the carrier strike group. We spend our lives preparing for the next war, he said, mostly to himself. We study the enemy. We build better tools. We find better ways to kill. But we never prepared for this. We never prepared for the possibility that we are no longer the most advanced species on the board. Thorne looked at his hands. He could still feel the phantom vibration of the stick when the aircraft took over. He realized that the world had changed in those 60 seconds. The era of human warfare had reached a boundary. What happens now? Thorne asked. The lead analyst shut his laptop. Now, we wait. We wait to see if they are finished, or if they are just getting started. The strategic reality of the planet had been reset. The aftermath was not about politics or borders. It was about the realization that the digital veil had been lifted. revealing a power that held the leash of every weapon on Earth. 3 days later, the Pentagon, Washington District of Columbia. The hallways of the E-ring were usually a hive of activity. By 8 o'clock in the morning, today they were silent. Men and women in uniform moved with a hushed, tentative energy. They carried folders that remained closed. They spoke in whispers. The world was still turning, but the gears of the military-industrial complex had slowed to a crawl. In a windowless room deep in the basement, a group of high-ranking officers and civilian scientists sat around a table that had seen the planning of 3 major wars. General Arthur Bradley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, looked at the screen at the end of the room. It was blank. 72 hours since the Persian Gulf incident, the general said. His voice was tired. 72 hours since every advanced weapon system on this planet was neutralized by a single command. We have spent $100 billion on cybersecurity in the last decade. We have spent trillions on stealth and electronic warfare. And yet, we were turned off like a television set. He looked at the lead scientist from the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. Tell me the assessment. Is it a weapon? Is it a nation? The scientist did not look up from his tablet. Sir, our assessment has not changed. No human entity has the processing power to execute a synchronized override of 5 different satellite constellations and 3,000 independent tactical networks. To do that, you would need a computer the size of a city, or a technology that does not rely on binary code. We are looking at a signature that is not terrestrial. The word used, FINIS, was a message. It was a period at the end of a sentence. 3 days later, an undisclosed government facility in Tehran, Major Rezai stood in a courtyard, looking at the faded mountains in the distance. He was no longer in uniform. He had been told to take a leave of absence. His report on the incident had been classified as a technical anomaly, but he knew better. He had seen the way the American jets moved when they were forced apart. It was not a maneuver, it was a repositioning. They were being moved like toys. He thought about the American pilot, Thorne. He wondered if the man was also standing somewhere, looking at the sky and feeling the same profound insignificance. For 20 years, Rezai had defined himself by the enemy. He had studied the Americans, he had hated them, he had respected them. But now, the enemy was gone. In its place was something so vast and so capable that the very idea of a border seemed like a joke.
The situation in the north is escalating faster.
The world is quiet, a voice said behind him. It was a senior advisor to the ministry. No one is flying. The Americans have pulled their carrier back to the middle of the Indian Ocean. Our batteries are in storage. For the first time in my life, there is no talk of war. Rezai nodded. Because we are being watched. You do. Not fight in a room when you know the owner is standing in the corner with a fire extinguisher. 3 days later, the Atlantic Ocean. Commander Thorne stood on the flight deck of the Abraham Lincoln. The carrier was steaming toward a home port. The mission was over. The tactical analysis was complete. The conclusion of the official report was that a massive solar flare had caused a temporary disruption of global electronics. It was a lie. Everyone on the ship knew it was a lie. They had seen the word. They had felt the blue light. Thorne looked at the horizon. He thought about the master arm switch. He thought about the weight of the missile as it left the rail. He realized that the human race had reached its peak of destructive capability, only to find that it was still in the elementary stages of existence. The digital veil had been lifted, and behind it was a reality that demanded a different kind of courage. Strategic assessment. The events of the night of the Persian Gulf did not lead to a war. They led to a silence. A silence that has lasted for 3 days. Across the globe, the rhetoric of aggression has been replaced by the language of caution. No one wants to be the next one to test the limits of the observer. Modern warfare is a game of technology and will, but history has shifted. The final analysis of the incident is simple. We are not alone. We are not in control. And the weapons we built to protect ourselves are only as powerful as we are allowed to be. The sky is empty of missiles. The radars are clear, but the world is listening. Final thought. History is decided, not by who fires first, but by who chooses not to fire at all. And if we do not choose, someone else will choose for us.